Getting nearly blasted off the table first turn is really annoying, so today we're talking about Alpha Strike and how you can best defend yourself from it. And that's coming right up. Welcome back, and it's great to have you here. If this is your first time here, here's what's up. If you want to improve your wargaming, make your tabletop battles more epic, and give your wargaming budget more power, then be sure to smash the subscribe button and ding the bell. That way, you won't miss anything. Now, let's talk about Alpha Strike and how annoying it is and how you can beat it. So, before we talk about how to defeat an Alpha Strike army, we need to understand how they work. And fundamentally, they work by doing so much damage turn 1 and turn 2 that you just do not have the model count on the table to be able to either complete the objective or retaliate effectively. And they do this by either having lots of very long-range weapons that do a lot of damage and deal out a lot of shots very quickly, and they take you down from range. Or they will use some form of deep strike to get very close to you and shoot you to death from there. Am I allowed to say that? I hope so. So talking about the ways that players will get close to you, because them standing back at range is fairly self-explanatory, but a lot of players will use deep strike to get close to you, so this presents you an opportunity to cause them a lot of problems. So I have 3 different ways that you can defeat an Alpha Strike army, depending on what configuration of Alpha Strike they're using. So starting with an Alpha Strike army that is deep striking in and getting right up close to you and dealing damage that way, the best way to defeat them is by bubble wrapping your entire army. And no, I don't mean literally wrapping plastic with bubbles in it around your miniatures. What I mean by this is, like you would when bubble wrapping a character, you use similar principles. Because a lot of stuff that deep strikes has to be either 9 or 12 inches away from any enemy units, you deploy your army so that there is no room behind your army, to the sides of your army, or in the middle of your army, and you space everything out as much as possible, meaning they have to deploy in front of your army. Now, this is where you get a unit that is really, really cheap to be the thing that is right at the front line, so that it is the first thing that they need to deal with before getting closer to you. So, if I was playing my Necrons, I would use something like, say, Scarabs, and I would just put 3 units of 6 to 9 Scarab bases at my front line, and then space everything out behind that so that they have to get through the Scarabs to get to my units. While yes, they could try and ignore the Scarabs, generally speaking an opponent is not going to do that just because it will cause them problems later and they know it. So this next tactic works against either configuration of an Alpha Strike army. Basically involves keeping as many units as you are allowed to keep in reserve and bringing them on later in the game so they can't be shot at. And the stuff that you do put on the table needs to be incredibly tough. You need to make sure that they cannot take down all of it first turn. And a very good way to do this is make it so that that sort of stuff needs very specific weapons to take it down. So in the case of Necrons, things like Ghost Arcs and Doomsday Arcs do work fairly well for this because they require high strength, high volume of shot, low damage weapons to be able to take them down effectively. Las cannons and melters are not all that effective against them because of the quantum shielding, and because they're toughness 6, things like bolt guns and heavy bolters are not going to be effective either. Which means, because the stuff that is going to be alpha striking you will generally be a mix of different types of weapons so that they can take down different types of enemies and do damage across your entire army effectively, it means that you have nullified a good chunk of the weapons they're going to be bringing to alpha strike you, and then you can beta strike them, which we will get to in a moment. However, we do have one more tactic to get through, and this tactic is specifically designed for dealing with long-range Alpha Strike armies. So basically the scenario is that your opponent has set up lots of high-powered long-range weapons and they are gun-lining you, but because they're able to just do so much damage, first turn is going to cause you some problems. So in this scenario, line of sight blocking terrain is your friend, any cover saves you can get are your friends, and because you don't really have to worry about your opponent moving around, blocking line of sight becomes easier because of that. Because generally speaking, if we're talking long range, high powered weapons, your opponent is not going to want to move them if they can help it, which means you can stack the deck in your favor by blocking line of sight, forcing them to either not shoot that unit or to move and then shoot, decreasing their accuracy if they're firing heavy weapons. So now you have gotten through the first turn of their assault and you have managed to not take as much damage as they would have liked. This is where your beta strike comes in, and basically at this point you're going to bring in either any reserves or you're going to bring your stuff out of cover and you are going to perform either a pincer maneuver or a hammer and anvil maneuver on your opponent, depending on how they're deployed and what you can actually get away with. The reason you want to use one of these maneuvers rather than just straight up moving towards your enemy is because you need to either still utilize cover where possible, or you need to make sure that in your turn 1 and your turn 2, you are right up and you are in range to do as much damage as possible. So Necrons being a medium range army, at this point, if you'd say put lots of Ghost Arcs full of warriors on the table, because the Ghost Arcs will be able to weather most alpha strikes fairly effectively if you have a good number of them, you then move your Ghost Arcs around in a pincer maneuver and you attack both of their flanks so that they have to change their formation considerably to be able to retaliate effectively. This buys you time and it causes them to have to go for a backup plan that they don't have. Now, if your opponent is doing an alpha strike where they've come towards you, so they're not doing a stay back gun line, and they have opened up a gap behind them because of the nature of their alpha strike tactic, and you have the option of deep striking. I particularly like using this one with Grey Knights because so much of their stuff does deep strike. It is at this point that you have the stuff you started on the table, anything that's still alive can move towards, and you deep strike the other stuff in behind them and you hammer and anvil them hard. The beauty of this tactic is that you have effectively taken what they were going to try to do to you and you have turned it around and you are now doing it to them, which of course is demoralizing to the player themselves, and also it means that they are not going to be thinking clearly because their plan has fallen apart and they're going to try to cobble together a plan from what is left. And I don't know about you, but in my personal experience, plans that are cobbled together on the battlefield, generally speaking, don't work out that well. So for you fellow Necron players out there, I have just a bonus tip that I'd like you to try out. It's going to sound a little crazy at first, but I have found it to be fairly effective. And basically, this strategy is that you take 4 different types of units, and that's all that you really take. Of course, you're going to take a HQ, whichever one you like to work with the most will do fine, but the units you want to take are Ghost Arcs, Night Scythes, Warriors, and Immortals. You load your Warriors into your Ghost Arcs, and your Immortals are kept on the Tomb World. You want at least, at an absolute minimum, for a 1500 point game, 3 Night Scythes for this to work, because they are kind of fragile. And you want to try to balance the number of Warriors squads to the number of Immortals squads, because you don't want to be keeping too much back on your Tomb World, because there is a risk that this could backfire if your opponent takes either lots of las cannons, for example, or if they get a lucky shot on their d6 damage. And basically, this tactic is that you try to hide your Ghost Arcs as best as possible. Your Night Scythes, because they're such a large model, are going to be difficult to hide, so they are going to take quite a bit of the grunt of your opponent's attack, which is why you want to take more Night Sides than you have Immortals on your Tomb World. And basically, this way, all of your opponent's small arms have been nullified. They're not going to do much, and the las cannons are only going to be effective against the Night Sides, and most opponents are not going to take a huge number of high output, low damage weapons in a lot of cases. And then basically you just play the game and you use a pincer maneuver with your units, employing the tactics that we already talked about depending on what kind of Alpha Strike army you are up against. So give that a try, and I promise you that if you play with it a bit and tweak it to whatever your opponent brings at you, it will work quite effectively. And given how much of a bad name the Night Scythe has in this edition, it's particularly hilarious when it works. I've used it in a fair few games now, and it is a fun tactic to play. Give it a try. It might not work against all opponents, but it has worked against most opponents I have used it against so far. So there you go, guys. There are some of the tactics that I use when dealing with a player employing Alpha Strike tactics. Just to summarize, basically, you're going to face one of two different types of Alpha Strikes. Either they're going to come to you and do lots of damage up close in the first turn, or they're going to try to stay back and do lots of damage at range first turn. And the three ways that you have to try to defend against this is either A, you put stuff on the table that is only vulnerable to a very specific range of weapons, meaning that a lot of their weapons are not going to be all that effective, and you have the rest of your army held in reserve ready to come in later. Or if you have line of sight blocking terrain available to you, you hide whatever you can and break line of sight, forcing your opponent to break their formation and reassess their plan. Or alternatively, if your opponent looks like they're heavily going to utilize deep strike tactics, then you make it so they don't have anywhere to deep strike to that would give them that much of an advantage. Basically, the fundamentals of defeating Alpha Strike are that you want to try to waste their first and second turn as much as you possibly can, because if you can weather through that turn, they're not going to have thought out turns 3, 4, 5, and 6, because those turns they never intended to actually play. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up so we know that you like it, so we can keep making stuff that you like. And if you have any suggestions for how to deal with an Alpha Strike army, leave it in the comment section below. I'd love to hear about it. And as always, guys, if you want to improve your wargaming, make your tabletop battles more epic, and give your wargaming budget more power, then be sure to smash the crosshair and ding the bell. You'll subscribe and I'll be able to share with you more battle reports, terrain tutorials, and strategies to make your wargaming experience more epic. And I'll see you next time.